From the Fidelity Bank Foundation studio, PBS Kansas presents One-on-One with Victor Hogstrom.
This is where Kansans of acclaim and substance come to talk about things that matter. This week, I welcome a lifelong aviator who has worked at all four of Wichita's major aircraft manufacturers. Now he has embarked upon a new journey to preserve a major piece of aviation history. My guest is Rick Rowe. Rowe started working at Cessna and taking flying lessons right out of high school. But then he joined the Navy in the midst of the Vietnam War. Upon returning home, Rick returned to the aviation business. Over the course of 4 decades, he worked in various positions at Cessna, Boeing, Beechcraft, and Learjet. Upon retiring in 2013, Rowe went into business for himself as a contract pilot and safety consultant. And now he's dedicating his time to helping restore the first Learjet ever sold, a major project that has enlisted a dedicated team of skilled volunteers. We'll talk about that along with the joys and challenges of aviation as I go one-on-one with Rick Rowe right now. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Victor Hogstrom. I'm so pleased to welcome aviator Rick Rowe to the program. Rick, it's a pleasure to have you to talk about some history, your history and your work in aviation. But before we begin that process, that lifelong excitement that you've had for aviation, let's talk about Rick Rowe. Talk about you first. As a young man, what was your ambition growing up?
Thank you, Victor. I'm flattered to be here, by the way. And growing up as a kid, a lot of people tell this story, and it's maybe a little bit cliche, but when I was about 10 years old, my dad had a friend who had a little airplane, and he took us for a ride, and I was hooked. I was hooked. I dreamed of being a pilot in some fashion from then on until I started taking flying lessons right after I graduated from high school and when I was 18 in 1969. 1967.
And that was then your first excitement for aviation. That's how it all started.
It did. It started there, and it's never really waned at all throughout my whole life.
But in 1969, you you worked in, as you grew up, for several companies in Wichita, but that came to a halt in 1969 when you were about to be drafted in the Army, and you decided, no, you didn't want the Army. You wanted to do some other branch of the military. You decided to join the Navy.
That's right. I was working on the production line at Cessna at the time on the A-37 and T-37 military airplanes, and when I joined the Navy, I enlisted as an aviation mechanic. I was planning on to do my career in the Navy as an aviation mechanic on aircraft carriers and so on.
So you joined the Navy, and what went through your mind taking you away from that exciting career opportunity that you thought you had and that you had planned all your life around?
The thought of becoming a pilot never really left my mind, but being able to work on airplanes and seeing the fighters go on and off the carrier kind of satisfied that longing, at least to be around airplanes and be close to them and touch them.
So exactly what did you do in the Navy?
Well, that's a little bit of another part of that story. During boot camp, when I had enlisted to be an aviation mechanic, I scored really high in boot camp on a language aptitude test, and I was asked if I wanted to have a job using a foreign language that was classified and didn't know much about it. And I said, well, Yes. So I accepted that job and became a linguist in the Navy instead of an aircraft mechanic.
Okay.
How does that play?
A big switch.
A big switch.
And what language is this that you speak?
Yeah, Russian.
Really?
Yeah.
You still remember every word of Russian?
I do not remember every word. I can hold my own a little bit because if you don't use it every day, you're not fluent anymore. At one point, I was fluent.
So you got out of the Navy in 1977, and then what?
I went back to work at Cessna in the same area that I had worked prior to entering the Navy, and I was working on the production line for the Conquest aircraft and the Citation III aircraft.
So as I said earlier, you worked at all of the major companies, Cessna, Boeing, Beechcraft, and Learjet.
That's right.
And you went back to all of them?
I left Cessna in a downturn in 1984, and as a lot of us do in Wichita, being the air capital of the world, we migrate from airplane company to airplane company as downturns and layoffs at one and the other. So after I left Cessna in 1984, I went to work at Boeing on the 737 production line. After a year and a half or so, I left there and went to work at Beech in technical publications and was laid off in 1988, August of 1988 from Beech Technical Publications, and a short gap, and then I was hired in technical publications at Learjet in 1988.
Now, the word is that Boeing may be coming back to Wichita. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. The name Boeing is really, even with the bad press they've gotten recently, Boeing is still a class act.
So why did they decide to come back to you?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Which company do you remember most fondly that you worked for?
Well, it would have to be Learjet.
Okay. And why is that?
Because of my job in technical publications at Learjet, I was able to get acquainted with a lot of the test pilots and the marketing pilots, and I made my desire to be a pilot and to fly Learjets known to the director of the marketing department. And at that time, I was a private pilot with about 700 hours total time. And when I told him I wanted to learn to fly Learjets and told him of my private pilot and 700 hours, he was very gracious. He did not laugh at me because those qualifications were very minimal compared to what the requirement to be a professional Learjet pilot was. Mm-hmm. So he more or less took me under his wing, told me to go out and fly everything I could fly, get all my ratings, and keep in touch with him. And so I did that. That would have been in about 1990. And then in 1992, I had gotten a lot of my ratings, a flight instructor's license and a commercial multi-engine ratings. We were in touch, and I got a call from actually another part of the flight department in Learjet, asking if I could help them ferry a Lear 31A down to Tucson for completions. That I would become second in command qualified if I could help them do that. And I thought about that for about 1 second and said, yes, I can do that. And so that was the stepping stone that got me to live my dream, actually.
So Rick, can anyone become a good airplane pilot, or does it take some natural talent?
I think anyone can become a good airplane pilot. Some of the pilots that I've flown with are more natural than other pilots. But because of the rigorous training and standard operating procedures, it is a very, very safe way to travel.
So how many different types of aircrafts have you flown?
I have 5 type ratings in jets, and I've flown several other small airplanes, Cessna 172s, 182s, Cardinals, Cessna 310, Beech Baron, Cherokees.
So how much more difficult is it to fly a small prop plane than is it to fly a small jet?
It's different. I wouldn't say there's a difference in the difficulty. It can be difficult in both at the moment. The biggest difference between a small piston-powered airplane and a jet airplane is the speed. When you get into a jet, you have to be able to think way out ahead of the airplane and plan your next move quickly because the speed is so fast.
What was your worst experience as a pilot flying?
I suppose the worst experience, when I was in the Navy and I was stationed in Scotland, and that's where I ended up getting my private pilot's license. I was in a flying club there, and I took off from the airport one day and went out over the North Sea in a little airplane, and a dense fog rolled in, which is typical off the North Sea in Scotland, and I was instantly in instrument conditions, and I didn't have an instrument rating. So I did what I was trained to do. I let down and headed out to sea, so I didn't hit anything until I broke out of the clouds, turned around, and went back to the airport. But that was the scariest thing that ever happened to me.
So there is an elite group of pilots that has flown without issues or problems. These folks receive the Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award. How close are you to that?
Victor, I'm as close as doing the paperwork. I have the credentials, I have the qualifications, I just haven't done the paperwork.
What's stopping you?
Time, that's all.
Okay, we've learned so much about you. Let's talk about this project that you're now embarking upon, and that's the restoration of a Learjet, the first one that was made in Wichita?
No, sir. The first one, the airplane was made in Wichita, but it's the first one that was delivered. There were two airplanes, two Learjet serial number 1 and 2 prior to this airplane, which is serial number 3. As it turns out, serial number 3 was first flown 60 years ago, May 15th, 1964. 23003 took its first flight, and then was delivered, the first business jet delivered to a customer on October 13th of 1964.
Okay, so some little technical difference there.
Yes.
All right, so tell us about this restoration project and why it's important to you and others.
The project is important to the entire business aviation, business jet industry. In 1925, Clyde Cessna, Walter Beech, Lloyd Stearman were all grouped together in an airplane company, and they were building airplanes. Soon they departed company, and by 1928, I think there were 16 different airplane companies in Wichita, and Wichita was billing itself as the air capital of the world. And through the years, the aviation industry continued to blossom and continued to blossom. And so fast forward to 1959, Bill Lear came to town, and he had always had a dream of building a business jet. Bill Lear came to town and challenged the other manufacturers to build a business jet. And he said, if you don't, I will. And they didn't. And in 1962, he was back here building a purpose-built business jet. And that's how Learjet got started.
So why do you want to restore this, and what would be the purpose, the outcome, the goal?
Yeah, the goal is to restore the airplane, to preserve the legacy and the history of it, to connect, to keep the history of this airplane alive, and to educate everybody that we can about Bill Lear and his genius and how the Learjet came about. But the purpose is that this launched the business jet industry. There were business airplanes, but they were all piston-powered airplanes. So this was the first jet. Mm-hmm. And Bill Lear, through his genius and passion and drive, launched the business jet industry from the 1960s into the 21st century where we sit today. And by founding Learjet, soon the Citation came along, and the Falcons came along, and the Gulfstreams came along, and there was a healthy competition. But now it's not a competition. The restoration of 23003 is for every pilot, every engineer, every flight attendant, every technical rider, and any other person that has given their dedication and their passion to the aviation industry, because this restoration is for all of us. It's for Wichita. It's for the whole business jet industry.
So what will it bring to Wichita?
It will bring to Wichita, it will help Wichita maintain the name Air Capital of the World. And it will showcase, as B-29 Doc does for the military aviation, Learjet 23003, when it flies again, will bring that same nostalgia and that same romance to the aviation industry and to Wichita, the air capital of the world, as the B-29 Doc does.
Rick, tell me this, when Learjet stopped manufacturing planes, what was your reaction?
Several. There was, it was like a death in the family, because I have Learjet blood in my veins. In 1977, when I got out of the Navy and I was working at Cessna, at the Wallace plant just across the field from Learjet, I used to sit outside at breaks and lunch and watch the Learjet Longhorn take off. Well, the Longhorn was the first Learjet with winglets that Learjet developed in concert with NASA. And I would sit there dreaming of those airplanes and flying them. And so when it was time for the Learjet product line to finish, it was one of sadness, it was one of grief, it was one of disbelief. But through the restoration of 23003, we can keep that alive.
What do you think the future holds for the aviation manufacturing in the air capital?
I think it's a good future. There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of talent. There is the workforce is one of the reasons that Bill Lear brought Learjet here in the first place, is because we had the workforce already in place, and that workforce is still here, and that passion is still here. And Wichita is still a really good place to build airplanes because it's flat around here. And we complain about the weather in Wichita, but in fact, we have a lot of really good flying days in Wichita. So I think the future of business aviation manufacturing in Wichita is bright.
There's been talk about air taxes, talking about brightness for the future. There's been talked about air taxes for passengers' purposes, calling like a cab, you get a cab and you get an air taxi to pick you up and take you somewhere. How is it expected to work, and how soon can we expect it?
I don't know exactly how it will work. There is a lot to be determined on just exactly how it will be regulated, what aircraft might be used for it. I think it will happen. I don't know how soon it will happen. I think there are a lot of decisions to be made by the manufacturers, by the regulators, and those who might try to run one of those businesses.
Are manufacturers still discussing it, that idea?
Yes. Not necessarily the mainstream manufacturers like Cessna and like Textron and Bombardier, but other manufacturers are discussing it, yes.
Would the air capital be the leader in this regard?
It could be. if it wanted to be.
Okay. So what advice would you have for a young person who's interested in becoming a pilot?
My advice to a young person wanting to become a pilot would be, ask yourself, are you really committed to this? Is this really what you want to do? Because it's a long, hard road to get the aviation education and the right aviation education. It takes a long time to get the credentials and get the credibility. I'm an enigma. I guess I'm a product of the American dream, if you will. Mm-hmm. Because at the level I got to start flying Learjets, I had none of the qualifications or the time required.
So what would be the first step you would suggest to someone?
First step, make the decision. It's a commitment. Mm-hmm. Make the decision to commit to it and find the best flight school you possibly can and jump in. And
let's talk again about the restoration of the Learjet.
Okay.
After it's restored, where will it be located, by the way?
We hope it will stay in Wichita. The foundation is in we're on the verge of finalizing a long-term hosting agreement. And right now it's sitting at the former Learjet delivery hangar in Bombardier. And as soon as we get that long-term hosting agreement, it will sit there and we'll be able to then really jump into taking the airplane apart and starting the reconstruction.
So when it's done, would people just come and go through it, walk through it, or would you be able to fly people around in it? Just what is the future plan?
The future plan is to have a facility that the airplane can be shown, given tours at an airport where the airplane can be flown, and we're in discussions within the board of directors as to how will we really operate this airplane. Will we do passenger flights and all those kinds of things, because that has bearing on how we will certify the airplane and what kind of instrumentation from 1964 will have to be brought into 2024 right. in order to operate in today's airspace.
Right. Why Learjet when you had beach crafts, you had Boeing planes, you had Cessnas, but why Learjet?
The classic Learjet Foundation is made up completely of current, former, and retired Learjet employees. And a couple of guys were toying with the idea of doing something with a restoration, and this airplane came to them out of the clear blue sky. A call came to our historian, Dick Kovich, and said, I heard you're interested in buying a Learjet. And those guys put the team together, the crew together, and ended up with this particular airplane, and here we are.
So with your work in the aircraft industry, and now your work on restoring and your flying of airplanes, when you think about it, what would Rick Rowe like his legacy to be?
I would like my legacy to be a good human being and a pilot who got to fly airplanes for a living and used all the standard operating procedures and knowledge-based training to do all the right things right, even when no one else is looking.
Well, that sounds very good. And on that note, we'll say thank you so much for joining us, Rick Rowe, aviator, pilot, plane manufacturer, everything, writer, right?
technical writer.
Technical writer. Still a writer.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Victor. I appreciate it.
All right. And thank you for taking the time to watch. oneonone@kpts.org is our email address if you have a question or comment. We always enjoy hearing from you. I'm Victor Hogstrom. Stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.